and their care and other care providers with practical tools, timely resource, and faith-rooted encouragement. So I encourage you to share our Healthy Together Mississippi Facebook page and our website, www.healthytogetherms.org. And we want you to stay tuned for all future upcoming webinars, because they will be, again, very informative. And we have also some exciting news that we will be sharing with you. So, as you know, every month we try to make you aware of some health observances that are going on. And so we want to talk this month about those health observances for April. One of the first ones I'll mention to you is National Minority Health Month, which is celebrated every April to raise awareness in health disparities that affect racial and ethnic minority populations, and is to promote health equity. It focuses on education, early detection, and reducing gaps in care caused by social, economic, and environmental factors. So it's aiming to make sure that everyone has a healthy lifestyle and live to a full health potential. So another important event that's celebrated on April 7th is World Health Day, better known as WHO, and it was established in April 7th, 1948, and it acts as the directing authority on international public health, coordinating responses to global emergencies, and managing disease and outbreak. It also sets the health standards. In 2006, the 2006, the theme is Together for Health Stands with Science. It highlights the progress of science and collaborations. And finally, April is National Autism Acceptance Month, formerly known as Autism Awareness Month. It's dedicated to fostering inclusion, celebrating neurodiversity, and increasing understanding of autism, and it helps to address the challenges faced by individuals with autism in terms of education and employment and in their daily lives. So it wants to help to also advocate for the acceptance in society. Now, why is this so important? Because according to CDC, 1 in 31 children in the United States identify with autism. Also, many children grow up without ever receiving their diagnosis. And so it's estimated that 2.2% of people over the age of 18 have autism spectrum disorder. New research suggests that the diagnosis of adults are on the rise, with the greatest increase of diagnosis occurring among people ages 26 to 34. According to a study published in JAMA Network Open, the rate of diagnosis in this age group increased by 450% from 2011 and 2022. Receiving an autism diagnosis in adulthood, it can be challenging, but it can also present opportunities for support and for growth. So I'm asking you to join us in celebrating Autism Acceptance Month throughout the month of April by using your voice and your platforms to spread the message of acceptance, inclusion, and helping connect people to the support services, and mostly important, to one another. So today we have Dr. Don Vereen, who's going to inform us about autism so that we can have a better understanding, and that we can hopefully be able to provide some information that will improve the health functioning for our children and our families, and give them the resources that they need, or the answers or questions that they need to when they go in to talk to their medical provider or their child's medical provider, or even just talking to their children or to their child's teacher. And so we want you to stay tuned for that. But before we talk about the presentation, as always, I want to remind you to get your paper and your pencil so that you can write down any questions that you might have. And the reason that it's important that you do that is because we want you to be equipped with the right questions so that you get the right answers. So that if your child or you are facing issues with autism or living with autism, then you're facing issues that you can't overcome because people don't understand. you have the right questions to ask to get the answers that you need to help you and your child have a better quality of life. Now, also today, we are going to pivot just a little bit from our normal procedure because Dr. Vereen says he wants to hear from you immediately after he does his presentation. And so I'm going to hold any questions that I might have until after you have asked your questions. And then if there's some questions that you didn't ask that I think that might be help clear it up a little bit more or might provide additional answers to you, then I will ask those questions. So, uh, for most of us, Dr. Vereen is not a stranger. He loves to come on because guess what, you all, he's a native Mississippian and he loves helping his home state. And so we are also very glad to have him. Dr. Vereen is a psychiatrist and he's a public health expert that's best known for his work in substance abuse and and national drug policy. He currently serves as the Director of Community-Based Public Health at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and he's also the Director of the University of Michigan Substance Abuse Research Center. Again, Dr. Vereen, welcome and thank you so very much. You all, we want to make sure that we give him a special thanks and send him out some special love because today I was afraid he was going to cancel because they had a tornado in Ann Arbor last night, and he was somewhat affected by it. And so we are actually so glad and so grateful to God that there was not more damage done, not only to him but for the city and the other people. And we are so grateful that he's that committed to you that he insisted that he would show up this morning. So welcome, Dr. Vereen.
Thank you much, Bettina. I appreciate that. And I do apologize. I couldn't get to the indoor place that I wanted to be with you today. So I'm outside at a Starbucks. So there may be a little bit of noise in the background. Let me first say that I'm honored and looking forward to having a dialogue with you. As you know, if you've heard me interact with you before, I prefer to exchange knowledge by lecturing less and listening more. And hopefully we can have a dialogue. And please, if in the few minutes that I'll take to say a few general remarks, if you have a question or a comment, it's not really an interruption. Just indicate that you have something to say or you have a question, and we can have that conversation. So I don't have any visuals. I wasn't able to finish things last night, partly because of the terrible weather that we had. But with autism, we have a very, very interesting, I'm going to say, psychiatric as well as neurologic disease, disorder that is really starting to take all of us by storm. It's something that probably has existed for a long time, not unlike schizophrenia, not unlike diseases like depression. It's just that we didn't recognize them or we didn't think about them and deal with them in the way that we live our lives. And our lives are continuing to expand. Our standard of living is increasing. The kinds of things that are important in our culture and our society, like being able to go to school, being able to work regularly, have an income, to be able to read and write and think in order to be able to vote. All those things are evidence that we've increased our standard of living, if you will. And in that context, we're starting to see that there are patterns of behavior that get in the way of us being able to live our lives. That's probably the most general way that I can think about some of the psychiatric and mental health issues that we've discussed in the past. And I'm trying to keep that in a light that doesn't put the negative cast of a label on what may be happening in terms of something like autism. So in that vein, in psychiatry, there are certain major categories of, I'll say, illnesses or disorders or problems. We're aware of anxiety disorders. You know, you can have panic attacks, you can have generalized anxiety disorder, you can have post-traumatic stress. Those are a category because they involves human beings feeling anxious. Another category is we can have mood disorders. We can have low moods, depression, high moods, mania, and you can cycle between those: manic depressive illness, bipolar disorder. That's another category. You can have a personality disorder. You can have these, sometimes you're born with them, sometimes you develop them. It's usually a mix of these fixed personal traits that become a part of your personality and how you live your life. And those come in a number of different categories. That's a discussion for another lecture. Then there are the psychotic disorders, schizophrenia. You can have psychotic symptoms if you're high on drugs. You can have psychotic symptoms if you're depressed or manic. Another category would be eating disorders, eating too much, making yourself throw up, bulimia, etc. You can have a substance abuse, an addictive disorder where you can't stop taking a substance. Some people put Alzheimer's, when you have a dementia, in these mental illness categories. In that case, there are pretty specific brain issues that we can point to where the brain starts to degenerate. And then lastly are the developmental disorders. Neuro meaning the brain and nerves, and development meaning as a person gets older and older and older, you start to see more clearly things that are not quite settling right, not quite going as planned with the brain development. And that's where autism lives. So it's a part of a big category of things. And one of the reasons I went through all those categories is that a person who ends up being diagnosed with autism can experience any and multiple psychiatric symptoms in those other categories. So you can imagine that makes it very difficult to diagnose. But having said all that, there are some ways and some things that can be done in terms of observation. And there have been developed some pretty sophisticated tests. Usually what's required is an observation of the person by a professional. But there are some things that we can do in the public as parents, as friends, and as relatives in terms of our observation, and we'll be a little bit more educated about what the what this phenomenon is. So it's something that begins in childhood, and it's often diagnosed in childhood, but like so many mental health, mental illness issues, it's possible to live a pretty decent life by maybe fighting through some of these mental health problems, hiding them. Many people have an insight about their behavior and how they relate to the outside world, and they can hide or make up for the problems that they might be having living in a social world. So usually with autism, the diagnosis is often made by the time a kid, a baby, a child is 1 year old. What happens and what you see in a very, very young baby is babies learn pretty early to respond to their name. You know, mom and dad pick a name, or maybe the family picks a name. The baby's been named after somebody. And the baby gets used to hearing that sound. They may not know what the name is, but they know that the name, the word, the sound of their name is associated with them. And so parents will notice in particular that the baby doesn't always respond to their name. Babies, after they can be able to see, because often babies, when they're born, yeah, they can see, but they haven't learned to focus their lenses, to be able to focus on mom's and dad's nose or their eyes yet. But once babies get that, they are addicted to their parents' faces. And a kid with autism won't have much eye contact. It's one of the hallmark, if there is such a thing, hallmark sign that something's not quite right with this baby, if I could use that terminology. And then related to the eye contact and related to not being able to respond appropriately, positively to your name, there's an impaired ability to interact with the parent. The baby can seem distracted, paying attention to something else because they're not making eye contact. They may be paying attention to something else, maybe only one or two other things, and that's related to a symptom that we'll talk about in a second, that becomes more obvious when the baby gets older. So those three things, this decreased response to name, poor eye contact, and this impaired kind of one-on-one social ability, this very early social ability. Then as the baby gets older, you can start to see other behaviors where the baby may not be acting like, with the young child or toddler may not be acting like other kids. Young kids do have an imagination. They haven't been in the world long enough, and who knows what their wild little brains are thinking, and what's hidden in their baby talk. But parents can specifically note that they're not making up things. They're not thinking in a normal, age-appropriate, imaginary kind of way. They tend to not have an interest in other children. So most other kids seem to pick out other kids. They know, oh, you're young too, and usually you can see that. There's very little play or interaction with other kids. And for parents, the big issue is language development. So kids will start to say a few words, before they're one. They'll start to copy mom and dad and the people who are taking care of them. And you're not seeing that. You've heard of, you probably even know some babies that maybe didn't talk until they were 2 or 3 years old. There are not every kid that does that is autistic, but that's usually an important sign that something's not quite right. They're not able to get the language thing. They're not able to copy back what they've heard. They're not able to put 2 and 2 together and realize that a word has a meaning, and that processing isn't happening because they're not getting the words. And that language deficit is something that can cripple the baby. And I'm going to fast forward here. The things I've been talking about, since we can draw a picture of them and we can talk about them, it makes it an important point where professionals can intervene. Professionals and parents can, and friends and family can intervene. So if there's a language, there's a delayed ability to take on language, getting a young kid into speech therapy early can help neutralize and even reverse some of the consequences of not learning the language early on. Now, there are plenty of people with autism that make it into adulthood. So they clearly have or develop, language skills well enough to negotiate the world, to get through school, to be able to hold down a job. But their language, when you listen to it, can be very concrete, very one-dimensional. And again, when you can see that, that allows for an opportunity. Once you're able to assess something like that, that is something that then can be worked on and improved to mitigate some of the symptoms of autism. Very, very quickly, people with autism can have these repetitive behaviors. They can rock. Sometimes they'll rock to soothe themselves, or it's just the soothing kind of thing. So instead of me coming home and having a glass of wine, I might come home and sit on a chair and rock. And you may have seen people like this, people who are flapping their hands or walking on their toes. They love to do that over and over again. And then another aspect of repetitive behaviors is their thinking can be repetitive. And when that happens, or when that takes hold, people with autism get very rigid about their routines. They want to do the same thing over and over again, the same thing every time, the same way every time. And if you try to take them out of that routine, that's when you get some kind of resulting behavior. There's very little tolerance from moving from one routine to the next routine. So that there are transition difficulties. And then the last sort of category has to do with our senses. Smelling, tasting, seeing, feeling, loud sounds. The classic, oh, that's too loud. Something that, might be loud, but not so loud that you have to cover your ears. Someone who is sensitive to the sound will do this when everybody else is tolerating it. um, hyper reactions to smells. Sometimes certain textures can be very, very appealing to people with autism. I'm remembering a young kid I was evaluating once who was just absolutely taken with his mother's nylons. And so he was always, when she had on nylons, if she didn't, he wasn't interested. But if she had on nylons, she couldn't take him in public because he was just constantly rubbing up and down her legs because he loved the feel of the nylon, that fine feeling on his fingers. So let me sort of wrap up very, very quickly by saying there's a genetic basis to this. There's a biological basis to this disorder that really does, even in those in adulthood, begins in childhood. Something like 100 genes have been associated with different aspects of autism, and there may be more than 1,000 different genes, depending on what your autism looks like, that could play a role in the development of this disorder. Now, autism, I was taught, was a pretty rare thing. I did my training in the mid 80s to late 80s. So 40 years ago, this was considered a rarity in children. Now, as many as one in, what is the one number I saw? One in less than 100 kids may have some aspect of autism along the spectrum, from very severe, having all of the symptoms that I just mentioned, to maybe a mild version of one or two of these, enough that people would notice and that it's affected their lives. And so with increased awareness and by studying this, by doing research, it's become clear that, wow, it's not just the folks who have all of the things that I mentioned, but you might only have one or two, or very slightly 3 or 4, and it's enough to interfere with your life. And so with increased awareness by professionals like me, increased awareness by all healthcare professionals, all teachers noticing this, because if you have some of these symptoms, they're going to interfere with your ability to participate in school well. We've been getting better at detecting it and diagnosing it and treating it. We need to do a much better job at treating it. And so it seems like it's an epidemic, but in my opinion, this is like, drug abuse and addiction. There are many more people who are addicted to things like gambling and sex and things like that, but we never looked for it. And then once we looked for it, what is it about it that we needed to know? How would we be able to detect it earlier in people? And then lastly, what do we need to do to help these people so that their malady isn't interfering with their lives? So I'll end on this note that it's been recommended and it's been carried out in most places that some kind of diagnostic screening be done on all kids at 18 months and at 24 months That's mainly because sometimes the symptoms are so are so what's the word? They're so mild that you might not see them in an 18-month-old, and you wait until the kid is 2 or later. And in some cases, you may not notice it until a person is in adulthood. I'm gonna mention a couple of personal things here. I'm actually reviewing the evaluation of a young man who is 22, who was just diagnosed last week with autism. It's a new diagnosis for the family. They knew that he was dyslexic. I'm sorry, he had ADD, but they didn't know about that until much later. Professionals can miss things. My own daughter was severely dyslexic in the 2nd grade. She'd been dyslexic her whole life, but we didn't notice this until, her really good performance in school started to take a nosedive. And it was because she was having trouble translating the letters into words. And so professionals can miss things. I have a friend. I forgot to bring the book out of the car. I'll go grab it before we're finished so I can leave you a note. He's an anthropologist. His wife is a psychiatrist who I trained with. They have a daughter who's dyslexic. And, this Harvard-trained doc knew that something wasn't quite right, but, they had a kid who was active, and it wasn't until they went back and looked at some old family movies and realized Isabel never looked them in the eye. And she seemed like a happy kid, but she never really interacted with her parents like their second child did. And so this is a very, very difficult thing to see. But it's also a thing that people can get help with and for. So let me stop there. There's a lot more to say, and I've already gone over. So could we start with any comments about things that I've said, and or any questions?
Yes, we can, Dr. Vereen. Duke, are there any questions on the other social medias other than Zoom?
I'm checking now.
Oh. Oh my goodness.
No questions on social media.
Okay, so if you're on Zoom and you have questions, if you weren't here at the beginning, we changed up the format so that you can ask your questions now before I ask my questions of Dr. Vereen. So if you have any questions or if you have any comments, please, okay, so there's one in the chat. This is Dr. Vereen. You mentioned that autism may not be noticed until after age 12. Why is that? Dr. Vereen, were you able to hear the question? Hello?
No, I wasn't. Could you
Okay,
repeat
it's a
that?
question in the chat. It says that Dr. Vereen, you mentioned that autism may not be noticed until after ages 1 or 2. Why is that?
The way I'm going to answer the question is this way. When I gave the example of my friend who wrote a book about autism and his wife, who's a psychiatrist, if you're not looking for a problem, you a parent has a child and they're interacting with the child and they see everything in a positive light. They didn't notice really any differences until their second child came along and noticed the language development and other things. Part of it is you have to know to look for it. And if you're tolerant, and every baby is different. And if you don't have frank, if you don't have, the worst aspects of these symptoms, then you may not see anything. If I could give the example of people with depression, I used to miss it all the time in diagnosing it, especially in Black women, because it never showed up in how they lived their lives. They would be able to get up in the morning, they would make breakfast for their family, they would get the kids off to school, they'd make sure that the mom or the dad or that they were taken care of were set for the day, they'd go out and work, they'd come home and take care of the family, and they were profoundly depressed. And it's because it didn't show up, and individuals try to compensate for the things that they don't do well. And that can happen even in little babies and young toddlers. By the way, I'm going to be a little distracted because I can't plug in my computer out here and my battery is low, and I don't want to.
Uh-oh. I think he was trying to say, I don't want to lose you. For those of you who weren't here earlier, Dr. Vereen, he lives in Ann Arbor, and there was a tornado there last night. And so he didn't have any power at home. And so he had to leave his home, and he was outside of a Starbucks trying to join us. And I really, really am grateful and thankful for the fact that he did finish his presentation and that he was able to come and be with us. I cannot answer your questions. I can give you general knowledge, but if it's something that's in depth, I can't answer it. And I'm going to be quite honest because, as Dr. Vereen said, autism is something that you have to specifically be looking for. And although I am a trained and clinical licensed social worker, it's not something that I've worked with extensively. And so I wouldn't want to give you any wrong information. So hopefully he may be able to rejoin us. So let's give him a few minutes and see if he is, or if there is someone that does have questions. If you go ahead and put them in the chat, and if he's not able to rejoin us, we will get those questions answered for you and get those answers to you if you will put them in the chat along with your email address. Then we will make sure that we get you those answers. Or if you want to call me at 810-210-7720. Again, 810-210-7720, and share your question with me. I will make sure that we get you the answers from Dr. Vereen that you are seeking. So while we are waiting to see, giving him a few more minutes to see if he's going to rejoin us, I will go ahead and give you our updates, our friendly reminders for what's coming up. We do have Ask Mary and Pat Zoom webinar is at 6 p.m. on Monday. Is it April the 27th, Duke?
For the Ask Mary Pet Show?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And for Let's Talk Real Estate with Aria Mays, I have March 23rd at 11 a.m.
We will We will make an announcement about that date.
Okay,
I'll,
so
I'll check with her to make sure.
we are firm with that. We have a Ask Mary and Pat Zoom webinar at 6 p.m. on Monday, April the 27th. Check our website. It will be posted for the Ask Let's Talk About Real Estate with Area Mays. We know that the time usually is 11 a.m. and look like Dr. Vereen has been able to rejoin us. Okay, unmute yourself, Dr. Vereen. Unmute yourself, sir. Thank you.
There we go. Sorry,
All
sorry.
right.
I
Okay.
apologize. This has been a day.
Yes. Well, we are so grateful that you are sticking with us. So there is a question. It says, is it beneficial to enroll your child in a special program within a school or agency to help the child since that child cannot talk or has particular eating and playing habits?
And the answer is absolutely. And here's the reason why. The earlier that a diagnosis can be made means that the earlier the child can be plugged into the resources. They can get the resources and plugged into the programs that can help mitigate or even reverse some of the symptoms of the autism. And the reason that's so important is that babies, toddlers, children, adolescents, young adults, their brain is still developing. It's a term the term we use is plastic. The brain is constantly being affected by its environment. And so that's why we send our children to school. Their brains are still developing. And as the brains are developing, we are teaching that child. We are teaching the child through their brain to use their brains to add, subtract, to talk, to communicate by writing, by using oral language, by getting the child into some kind of program. That's where the therapy is happening. And so the things that have gone wrong with the in terms of the autism, getting them into therapy can slow that bad process down and often reverse it so that at some point those language skills will not only get better, but reach the point that we would want them to be so that they would be able to function and communicate like what we would call a normal adult. So that's why those programs are so important and why an early diagnosis is important. We've talked about this before, these labels. You get a psychiatric diagnosis and there's stigma attached to every psychiatric diagnosis, but it's a two-edged sword. And that's why finding clinicians and healthcare folks that are really in your corner is so important, because without that label, then you're not going to get the interventions, the treatments that have been tested and experimented on, that have been proven to work on that issue. So the programs, if you're lucky enough to have one, the earlier you can get your child in, the better. And that doesn't end. I mentioned the young man that I'm going to meet with his mother probably Friday or early next week to go over the findings. He's just been diagnosed at 22. And one of the things that's going to be difficult to find for him are programs that will take the findings and help him through You all have heard of occupational therapy, that they have for people, after a stroke, physical therapy, even. Because if you have language deficits, you've got to practice using your tongue in a certain way and your lips in a certain way to form the words in order to communicate well. All of those therapies are important in addressing the deficits that are from the autism. So does that make sense, and does that answer most of the question?
Yes. I think it says, the person says definitely. It does answer her question. Are there any other questions? Because this is the time to get those questions answered. Okay, so you've kind of talked about, since they don't have questions, Dr. Vereen.
Okay, I can go. Yeah, I can go through the other ones, but why don't you lead me?
Okay. You kind of answered this question, but I do want to kind of just go over it again.
Sure.
Oh, and there is a question that says, there is a question. You said, where do you start where do you start in getting help?
Okay. The first place to go is to your doc. And if it's a child or an adolescent, their pediatrician. The pediatricians are on top of this. Our internists and the family doctors are pretty good with this as well. Our internists, the more specialized you get, the more work you might have to do to get them to pay attention to this particular psychiatric disorder. But for kids, start with the pediatrician. Start with the pediatrician. And then in the school systems, even though they've got fewer and fewer resources, this is all about testing. So if there's a particular area in school where your child is not performing up to par, address that problem directly with the school and ask, could this be related to autism? Because what that does is it tells them what they need to be looking for. Because most schools, they're required to take care of all kids, regardless of their status. All kids are entitled to an education, and so they'll. I know for a fact they may not have all the best resources for testing because it's expensive, but they should be able to direct you to testing because there's a problem with learning in school. And so that is another place where you could start. But your pediatrician can do that as well. And the plus about engaging the pediatrician is the pediatrician can attach the testing to your health insurance. Hopefully there is health insurance, but this is a health issue. And so the pediatrician can order the tests, have a provisional diagnosis, order the tests, and there would be coverage by your insurance. So that's the other reason to start with your pediatrician and or your doc.
And there is another question about a list of resources, Dr. Vereen, and I think that you've given the answer. The very first place to start is with your pediatrician. If you don't have a pediatrician, then perhaps calling your insurance company and finding out which pediatricians that they have on their list that you can see, because we want to make sure that you are going to be able to get it covered. So make sure that your insurance company, they're in your insurance company's plan. And
Yeah.
then, the next place to go or at the same time with the school, because they might already have a psychologist or someone that they work with that they can refer you to. And then there's always the National Autism Association that we can reach out to
Mhm.
to find out in
And,
our area
yeah,
who
and
might be.
every group that you mentioned are the best sources for the resources.
Yes.
Yes, because they will be able to direct you to what's out there, because not every place is going to have the same level of resources. So they will be able to tell you where to go.
Okay, another question says, can a child be highly intelligent and still be autistic?
Absolutely. Often the intelligence comes out in very, very, very specific areas. And that's because kids with autism tend to focus on just one or two things. And you'll see this in adults with autism. They've got, one or two hobbies or things that they're involved in. Their whole world seems to be just that one thing. I can't say that. I know someone who he, I don't think he particularly likes bourbons, but he is an expert on every bourbon produced in the United States.
Wow.
If you've seen the movie Rain Man with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, his ability with numbers was incredible. And I do want to say this as a general point. Many of these psychiatric disorders used to be associated with what was called mental retardation. But when we look more closely, we realize these people aren't, cognitively challenged. Not at all. Their intelligence may be in a very, very narrow area, or it could be a very global intelligence, but you can't see it because they can't express it. And I'll give you two examples of that. The first is kids with ADD, attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If you tested those kids with traditional IQ tests, even though those IQ tests need some help, they're almost all way above normal. And the reason you can't see it is because these people can't sit still, or they can't hold their attention well enough, long enough to be able to do their schoolwork. So they look like they're dumb, but they're not. They're highly intelligent. In fact, they're so intelligent that they're able to hide their disease. The so-called dumb blonde, girls with ADHD, for example, most of the time are not hyperactive like their boy counterparts. So they sit in the classroom, they can't get what's going on. Their mind is wandering all over the place. They're twiddling their hair. And they just learn to look pretty because that's how people pay attention to them. But they're actually quite intelligent. Boys are often the class clown. They act out. Kids who are dyslexic. Our daughter, severely dyslexic, was overcompensating. And that's partly why we missed it. Very intelligent. Whoopi Goldberg one of the smartest people on this earth. She's a great actress. She's a great TV host. She's dyslexic. And she went into comedy, became a comedian, because that's where you see a lot of people with ADD and dyslexia. They end up acting because they can go into somebody else's life and pretend to be somebody else sometimes. They're not very empathic, but often, but they can do those kinds of things. So the intelligence, don't be fooled by the school performance. Assume that there's extra intelligence. That's why getting them into therapy and into some program is so important.
Okay. Well, I was going to mention Rain Man, so I'm glad that you brought it up, because if you haven't watched it, go and watch it. And if you know someone who is having problems with autism, or you suspect maybe having problems with autism, and you feel that you can't approach their parents in the traditional way, asking them to sit down and watch that movie with you may be one way of being able to open the door for conversation. Also, Dr. Vereen, there's one last question we have here. It says, is there a national or standard checklist by age as to what types of services are available?
About services. Because healthcare ultimately is controlled, the standards of care are determined state by state. My first answer would be I don't think so, but there are national organizations that have been collecting information for people who have questions. So I'm certainly NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, can be able to direct you to resources. But I think if you Google autism, what is likely to happen is you'll get a reference to some information that's been developed by an organization. And then that's where you'll see a national organization, and they will reading that entry will help you get an answer to the question. But almost all of these things are local
Frozen.
at some point.
Also, to tag on to what usually is age groups, not just.
Yes, that's true too. But in the case of autism, that there is this larger, in the case of autism, there is this larger and larger and growing recognition.
0 to 10 or 0. We're all gone.
What's that? What's that? Oh.
It's usually again by like category from 0 to 5 or 5 to 10. It's birth, adolescent, youth, adolescents, teenagers, and adults. But if they're going to break it down by age, it's age categories, instead of just that you can't go someplace and say, I want something on all 7-year-olds, or I want something on all 8-year-olds. It usually has to be a category of age.
Yeah, that's right. And it has to do with the way they break up the developmental stages.
Right.
So there's preschool, and then there's the latency aged kids. So from 6 to 8 or 9, and then the preteens, and then the teens, and then the adults. But again, start with your doc, because the doc, it can, if they're aware of the resources, or they'll be able to steer you to somebody who does know what the resources are. It's often the folks in social work that will know many of those things. The social worker involved with other health, with their fellow healthcare professionals.
Now, the person said that the reason that they asked that question is because there are certain legalities that come into play with guardianship.
Oh, so they're a guardian. Again, then I would re-emphasize the healthcare professional attached to the child.
Okay.
Because they will automatically take into account those issues, because they've got to be able to take care of the child, and they will make sure that the legal issues related to guardianship are dealt with when they're taking care of the child. And this becomes one of the health issues that they'll be responsible for.
Okay.
And take that into account.
All right. Well, thank you. This is interesting. I'm not the parent just asking questions related to their issues. So, okay. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Dr. Vereen, we did not have to get to my questions. So again, I want to thank you so very much for being here and soldiering through all of the difficulties that that you've been challenged with today. And we are so very glad that you are dedicated and want to provide, make sure that people get information. That's one thing I like about you. You are a medical professional, but you also have a pulse on the community, and you really care about the community, and you want to make sure that they have the answers that they need to have a healthy life and to have the questions that they need to ask those, to get those answers that they need. And so again, thank you so very much. I know that you are, personally, I know that you are go above and beyond. And so thank you so very much for your time. And we will say, again, the reminders are Ask Mary and Pat at 6 p.m. April the 27th. And then next month on the third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat, Dr. Vereen will be back with us again, because in talking with him today, we realized that it is National Mental Health Month. It is minority mental health. And so we want to talk about a health issue that seems to be lingering on, because there are a lot of people still have not been able to overcome the grief from COVID. And then also there are people that are soldiering through multiple deaths in their family at a time, and they don't know how to deal with that grief. And so there are different forms of grief, different stages of grief. And so that is one of the things that we will talk about next month on the third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat, when we are talking about mental health. So if there are no other questions, because we are after 12 and we want to be respectful of Dr. Vereen's time. So if there are no other questions from the social media platforms other than Zoom, we are going to wish you a wonderful, blessed day. And we thank you again for joining us. And please tune in again next month or sign on again next month for our third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat.
Thank you all.
And thank you for your questions. Have a blessed day. Now, if you're on Zoom, just stick around for another few minutes, and we will finish up.